So the next speaker is Stefan Albert Holzmann from Ruhr University Bochum. He's going to speak about those things are written by lawyers and programmers are reading that. It's about mapping the communication gap between software developers and privacy experts.
All right, great. Thank you. Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Stefan. And today I'm going to present our joint paper. Those things are written by lawyers and programmers are reading that, mapping the communication gap between software developers and privacy experts. So what is all of this about? At the moment, there are a lot of different legal requirements, so laws which have been introduced, and companies need to be compliant to these laws. Otherwise, there's a danger of them getting fined. So for the GDPR, the biggest European one alone, they have been given out since 2018 about 4.5 billion euros in fines. So companies are obviously very interested in being compliant when it comes to those fines. So as these are mostly legal texts, it's very difficult for normal software developers to understand these laws. So companies can use privacy experts, for example, lawyers, to create the requirements for the software the company is developing and gives these to the developers to implement. However, developers seem to often fail fulfilling these requirements, which is of course an issue for the companies because they are now open to fines. So the goal of our study was to see how this process works, where the challenges are, and how maybe this could be improved. So we did an interview study using grounded theory. We recruited overall 30 participants. We had privacy experts, so this could be lawyers. This could also be data protection officers. So everyone essentially who was responsible for creating such privacy requirements for a software product. Next, we had software developers. So basically anyone whose main task at work was producing software code. And in addition, we started to specifically recruit, we called them team coordinators, which were, for example, product owners or team leads. So anyone who are involved in the software development process, but a little bit more organizational tasks. And we did this because in our interview study, we noticed quite often that the software developers weren't sure about our questions and said, mostly this does my team lead or my product owner is responsible for this. So we made a point to specifically recruit these participants as well. Overall, our participants had an average of 9-year experience working with software concerning privacy, either creating privacy requirements or implementing them. So how does all of this look like? We have our 3 groups, the experts, the developers, and the team coordinators. In some way they all communicate with each other. So the developers or development teams quite often have to give out the technical status of the software they develop, what they do. And the privacy experts then are tasked with the creation of these privacy requirements. And they get passed back to the developers for the implementation into the software. Quite often we found that team coordinators are in the middle of this communication, so there wouldn't be any direct communication between software developers and privacy experts, but the team leads, for example, could take this role. What are our findings in the interview study concerning the requirements? So developers mainly face difficulties because the requirements are still written in legal language and are difficult to understand. So one of the team coordinators told us, they have to explain the question again in a normal language, essentially showing this is not easily to be understand from the software development teams, and thus very difficult to implement if you're not sure what the task is. Other than that, the privacy expert had challenges because there is a large number of different laws. Like one privacy expert told us that my role is the Americas privacy officer, so I'm primarily in charge of the US, Canada, Latin America, and many of these countries now have privacy laws as well. And while there are, of course, some similarities, there is no clear solution how to incorporate all these laws at the same time. Lastly, we found that the software developers quite often had no clear differentiation between security and privacy. So the go-to was always ensuring that the data is appropriately encrypted. However, this is of course good in an attack scenario, which is mostly what the software developers assumed. However, it leaves out company-related privacy challenges, like, for example, the misuse of data or ignoring purpose limitation, working with data without consent. And this gets quite often not really looked at by the software developers by themselves. So next we come to the communication. So we found mainly 3 ways how the teams communicated with each other. In cases where the privacy expert were, for example, freelance lawyers, we found very disconnected communication where only some requirements document was created, passed to the development teams, and then there was no further contact for the developers to ask questions or clarification, and they had to somehow follow this requirement they got. Next, we saw that in some setup there was a possibility to communicate through this requirements document, so the privacy artifact, where the development teams had the possibility to comment or ask questions in this requirement document, and the privacy expert would be able to answer there, would be able to give clarifications. However, there would be no direct communication between them in person. Next, we have also the interactive setup, which seems to be working the best, where the privacy experts and the software development teams would sit with each other in meetings, or at least some members of the team, discuss issues, could clearly solve any issues that arise, and can thus relatively clear state how to best proceed. However, and in this case, it was also because there was also a requirement document quite often created where the teams still could communicate or comment and ask for clarifications. And quite often this wasn't actually the software developers who were in these meetings or did this, but the team leads who were responsible for this. This depends a little bit on the team size and the company. So when you come to challenges of the communication, on one hand, the software developers feel that the experts lack the technical knowledge to write useful or applicable requirements, right? He doesn't have the software knowledge, as one participant said about the privacy expert at the company. However, the other way is also true, because the expert feel that the developers lack the privacy knowledge they require for their job. Right, one privacy expert told us they didn't want to implement certain issues because it didn't make sense to them. And lastly, many, especially the privacy expert, have described their relationship with the software development teams as adversarial, because they felt that they are always seen as a blocker, having to tell the software developers, no, you cannot do this, this is not compliant. We also had privacy expert participants who said that their personal relationship with the software developers would deteriorate because of this issue. Looking at implementation, requirements were seen as not specific enough. For example, when we gave one of the participants an example about access control to a database, it was immediately required additional information. Who are the users who get this access, or who is in the company, what access type, what are the roles and responsibility of this access. And next we found issues with the verification of these requirements, simply because the privacy experts can't really read software development code. This is also a very rare skill, especially if you have a legal background. Most people don't have this. So they said, I would not be able to check it on my own because I do not have the technical knowledge technical background or knowledge to do this. So this would be required by software developers again, who may not have correctly understand the requirements they received in the first place, making all of this difficult. All right, so we borrowed a little bit from the field of psychology why this communication is difficult, and this is what's called the common ground theory. So this essentially says that to effectively communicate with each other, two parties need to establish a common ground of knowledge on which they talk about. Yeah, this is part in two parts. So the first one is called the communal common ground, which is based on the stereotypical assumptions of the person you are speaking to. And in this case, we have the stereotypical assumption you base on the profession of the person, so a lawyer or software developers. And yeah, past work in psychology has also shown that experts misjudge what laypersons know about their own field of knowledge. So in our case, we have yeah, the privacy experts who are legal experts, and the software developers are the layperson in this case. However, the other way is also true, because the software developers are yeah, experts in software development, and the experts are the laypersons, making this very hard to establish, the communal common ground. And the other one that's called the personal common ground. This is based on the direct experience two persons have with each other, so communication they already had. And as we have seen, there's very little direct communication between the groups. Essentially meaning that also here this personal common ground can't really accurately be established. Yeah, and as we now have seen that the entire common ground is essentially difficult to establish between the groups, communication with them is very hard. All right, yeah, lastly, a quick call to action, what we would advise. So we would advocate against fostering an adversarial relationship between the expert and the developers, have them sit together in a meeting and get in contact with each other. We've also seen the concept of security champions from the field of security, and we would suggest using privacy champions similar, so software developers who have some idea about privacy, who are the go-to person and can maybe a little bit better talk to the experts on privacy issues. And lastly, would advise involving the expert as early as possible in the software development process, because it's very difficult to find mistakes already in the software and then to address them. All right, so this was everything from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or approach me after the study, yeah, or write an email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We have one question.
Thank you for the great presentation. I'm just wondering, in looking at the software development process, did you do any analysis of the type of software development process that was in place in these organizations? It occurs to me that if you're using, for example, a test-based structure, you might be able to better translate some of the privacy requirements. I was just curious if you saw any patterns in that.
So we asked our participants about this, and we didn't really find any strong differences between the different approaches at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you a lot. I should read the paper, but my questions are, did you find that basically the slides 24, 26, that basically the privacy expert is a blocker and it makes no sense to the developers? So would you say that the developers are the decision makers in the process, or is it actually the privacy experts are having the power to stop the decision? And if I can, one more question, then from the developer's perspective, did they comment on ambiguity of the requirements? Like, what does deletion mean? Is it a soft deletion, or is it that it has to propagate? Were there any troubles like that identified?
Yeah, so first for the responsibility, this may be different from company to company, but mostly the developers have to implement what they are told. So sometimes there's like a CEO, maybe in a smaller company, who gets these requirements and then says, okay, we do this or we don't care. But the software developers have very little influence on what's actually they have to implement. Essentially the blocker and the adversarial quite often comes from the software developers getting with an idea they want to do, something they're excited about, and then passing this to the privacy expert and see if they can do this, and they say, no, that's absolutely not compliant, we cannot do this, stop this, and this is where the the blocker part comes from. Could you quickly remind me on the second question? Sorry.
Yeah. If there is some ambiguity that basically, one of the issues that maybe the developers see is ambiguity from communication with the privacy expert. So if someone tells me you should delete the data, should I do a soft deletion, hard deletion? Was that identified as one of the problems?
Yeah, so this is a big issue, especially if there are very technical privacy terms are used. That the software developers have to find out by themselves what's actually meant by this. So generally they try their best, especially if they can't get any feedback from the experts. However, if you look at, I guess, online sources, you very quickly get very technical and very legal sources. Quite often you actually find the GDPR text at first, and trying to find out from there what you have to do is essentially not possible without a legal background, I would say, or very difficult, I think. Great, thank you. All right. Are there any other questions?